Okay.
All right. May I just give a quick couple of words about kind of the Reconstructionist um, relationship to Israel, and then Alan, if you want to go ahead after that and formally introduce Ori, that would be great. So I'm just I apologize. I'm reading from a very brief text. Reconstructionist Judaism has long viewed Israel as an essential element of Jewish peoplehood. Our founding ideologue, Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan, supported a Zionism grounded in three core values: Jewish survival, Jewish cultural and religious renaissance, and Jewish ethical nationhood, Gesund. He promoted a vision in which two vibrant centers of Jewish life, I should say, a vision in which two vibrant centers of Jewish life, Israel and North America, would support, shape, and when needed, give feedback and critique to each other. Our love for Israel exists alongside our desire to seek a just and lasting peace for Israelis and Palestinians. The central organizations of our movement have long advocated for a peace agreement that will protect Israel's security, the Israeli military occupation, fulfill the legitimate national aspirations of the Jewish and Palestinian peoples, and guarantee the human and civil rights of all involved. And I would add to this that our connection to Israel, as is true of many American Jews and Jewish organizations, is very, very much plugged into the democratic nature of both of our countries, and democracy is seen as very central to that, the depth of that relationship as well. So thank you for allowing me to give that short framing, and Alan, please take it away.
Okay. So our guest is Ori Nir, who's currently the Vice President of Public Affairs of Americans for Peace Now. And previously, Ori has done stints as a reporter in Israel for Haaretz and in the States for The Forward. And I just wanted to add a personal, I'm sure Ori doesn't remember this, but there was a board member, longtime board member of Americans for Peace Now, name was Al Stern. And Al Stern somehow managed to finagle myself and Sue Walpert, another member of their congregation, onto the board trip to Israel. They do an annual informational trip, and it was an amazing experience. The breadth of knowledge and the people that we got introduced to. And Ori was one of those people, and I was very impressed with what Ori had to share as well. So I'm really happy to see that he can be here to illuminate us again. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Ori.
Great, thank you. It's great to be here. Great to see so many people. I'm going to share my screen because I actually prepared a short presentation that's going to help me. Can you can see it, right? Can you?
Not yet.
No, we cannot.
Okay, so just 1 second. I'll try again. And you should be able to see it now.
Now we can, yeah.
Okay, great. So I will. Yeah, so I wanted to thank you for referring me, a former assistant coach for a soccer team of a elementary school of my daughter,
Okay.
to you know, the game that's now ongoing between no less an Ohio team and Patrick Mahomes. So if you preferred me to them, you know, I'm touched. So thank you. I wanted to start with actually a somber poem that I think captures the atmosphere now in Israel and my emotions in relation to what is going on. It's called The Reasonable Chance by Chaim Guri, the late Chaim Guri, one of Israel's chief national poets. And he wrote this poem. I'm not going to read it out. The one line that always kind of stays with me from this poem is, here generations pass along the rifle like a baton at a relay race. And then he goes on to say, there will be no lack of those who walk and wail, seeds of brothers, Isaac and Ishmael. And when I see, you know, the kind of violence that we've been seeing in the recent week or so, neutral violence, with the dynamic of revenge and counter revenge and so on, it's very somber. And I think that what you will hear from me today, unfortunately, is going to be pretty somber on other fronts as well. So yeah, I'm not going to be, I think, very upbeat today. What I wanted to do is to talk a little bit about why it is that you see this government, why this government came into being, and to go a little bit to kind of a background reasons for the government, this kind of government winning and forming a coalition, and why it is that the Israeli public stands behind it and you know, voted for a government that is so right-wing and hardline. So first, I thought we would talk just a little bit about the kind of timeline that led to it, because I think it's important to see that that there was a timeline with Netanyahu's legal case. Netanyahu's legal case is very much in the background of the government being elected. You can, by the way, you can ask me questions if you'd like during my presentation if there are things that are that you'd like me to clarify, and you're welcome to ask me at any point if there are things that are related to what I'm talking about and you want to just kind of elaborate on or so. Netanyahu's criminal case is important here because in order to deal with the challenges that he's facing legally, Netanyahu put together a bloc, and that is really important. That bloc is very loyal to him, and that bloc is what we see now in the coalition. The coalition is the Netanyahu bloc. This timeline just shows you how his case sort of solidified, and it pretty much follows the creation of that pro-Netanyahu bloc. What has happened in those past few years since around 2016, 2017 is that instead of the traditional fault line that you've seen in Israeli politics in the past of right and left, what we've seen develop is actually a different fault line, which goes along the lines of pro-Netanyahu, anti-Netanyahu. Or some people call it the just not Bibi or only Bibi camps. And the identification of people with Benjamin Netanyahu, with what he stands for, with, you know, from the perspective of people who support him, the persecution that he is being subject to by the legal establishment and so on, that issue has become the fault line of Israeli politics. Matters that have to do with the traditional right versus left in Israel, which I'm sure that all of you are familiar with, and I had a kind of a glimpse to see the kind of demographic that we have here on the call. I'm sure that all of you have been conditioned over the years to view Israeli politics as a right-left sort of dynamic, and that's not the case anymore. And the reason why we've had so many elections in the past 4 years, 5 rounds of elections, is that although the right dominates Israeli politics today, and we'll talk about it in a moment, there have been many on the right who have joined the anti-Netanyahu camp and refused to form a coalition with him. And because of that, you've seen this kind of tumultuous process of Netanyahu not being able to put together a coalition, and therefore all these elections, these rounds of elections, April 19, September 19, March 2020, March 2021, and now this past election in November. Another reason for the results of the November elections is people's reaction, many people's reaction to this, what was called the government of change in that has ruled between 2021 and 20, in other words, between the summer of 2021 and the summer of 2022. What do I mean by that? For the pro-Netanyahu camp, for people on the right, it crossed camps in many ways. The government, this change government, as it was called, was really a manifestation of many things that they resent. What do I mean by that? There was an Arab in the cabinet. Not only was he an Arab Knesset member, but he was a member of the Islamic movement. There are two Islamic movements in Israel. You may know it. The northern faction and the southern faction. The northern being more extreme, and the southern more pragmatic. He was the head of the southern one. But the fact that there was, and this is Mansour Abbas, the fact that there was in the cabinet an Arab, for many people was a red flag, was something that they couldn't deal with. The fact that Labor and Meretz, the two parties that are most identified with the left in Israel, that they were members of this cabinet, was really anathema for the pro-Bibi camp. The fact that people who, as they view it, as Netanyahu's supporters view it, betrayed Netanyahu, stabbed him in the back. In other words, right-wingers who decided to go with what they identified as the left. Gideon Sa'ar, who was a member of Likud, Avigdor Lieberman, a head of a party that is very right-wing, but decided he cannot go with Netanyahu. And Naftali Bennett, same thing, head of a party that was right-wing and decided not to go with Netanyahu. They viewed this government to a large extent as a government of turncoats, of people who have betrayed Netanyahu. This government was perceived wrongly, in my opinion, but it doesn't matter, as very Ashkenazi, white, woke, secular, anti-religious, whereas the Netanyahu bloc is conservative, traditional, more kind of, how would I put it, traditional religious or ultra-Orthodox. So the fact that you had many people who are identified in Israel with the leadership of the Ashkenazi, white, secular, Tel Avivian demographic in Israel was also anathema. So you have this kind of antagonism and antipathy that has built up during this year that the government, the change government, was in power. And as a result of that was a backlash that motivated people who support Netanyahu to flock to the polling booths and support him. Yet another reason is, and that is something that is very relevant today, we're seeing the dynamic of violence today, is the reaction, the backlash to Palestinian violence that happened during those 2 years, 2021 and 2022. There were 2 rounds of Palestinian violence during these 2 years, which brought back memories of the Second Intifada, which was a real deep, and we can talk about it if you'd like, about the impact that it had on Israeli psyche. The Second Intifada was a trauma that whenever you have these rounds of violence, it kind of takes people back to those very, very dark days. So because of the feeling of lack of personal safety and security that these 2 years have created among Israelis, they were looking for strong people, strong parties, and many of them identified Netanyahu, Ben Gvir, and Smotrich as such. Another thing that's in the background, which is really important, and we can talk about it later if you'd like, is the crashing, the gradual decline leading to a total crash of the traditional Israeli left. So this diagram shows you the voting percentage for the left, in other words, Meretz and Labor Party, or I should say Labor and Meretz, because Labor is strong, bigger, it's stronger. From 1992, the Oslo days, the Rabin days. So this is 1992 was the Rabin government, leading to today. Whereas in 1992, 44% of the vote in Israel went to those two left-wing parties, Labor and Meretz. Today, 2022, only 7%. 7% of the vote only went to the left. Now, some people could say, that Lapid's party is somewhat left and so on, but it doesn't identify itself as left. And I think that most people would not really identify it as left. It's center. And so in addition to that, what we see is that in the polls, very, very few people actually define themselves as left, somewhere between 3 and 7%, depending on which poll you look at. I looked at several polls that were done in the past few years, and only 8 to 12% consider themselves as center left. So, and it's in constant decline. And the word leftist, the actual word leftist in Israel, Smolan, Smolani, has become a derogatory word. It's something that people throw at each other, or throw at people, that is being thrown as a derogatory word. And here you have, I think that's really interesting, people's definition, how they define themselves along the spectrum of right and left by age group. And so I took only right because I think it shows how prevalent right-wing attitudes, positions, identity, if you will, among younger people is. And so in this demographic of 18 to 34, 2/3 of the population define themselves, not 3/4 actually define themselves as right-wing. So when you have so many people in a society that is rather young define themselves as right-wing, it is only natural that they would vote for right-wing parties. So that's another reason for the success of the right in Israel, that people define themselves, see themselves as right-wing. And then the most important thing, as I see it, because this is also gives you a kind of a trajectory toward the future, is the demographics. And in Israel, the more religious you are, including ultra-Orthodox, it's very important to recognize that as well. The more religious you are, the more right-wing you are. That is across the board. Every poll shows it. So what you see here is that people increasingly define themselves in other words, no, I'm sorry. What this shows is the political orientation of people by religiosity. So the more as we see here is the more religious you are, the more right wing you are, and what we see also is that there's a rise, and I couldn't find a good diagram that shows it, but there's a constant rise, and this we'll see in the next in this slide, in the size of the modern Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox population in Israel. The fertility rate is really off the charts if you compare it to other countries, Western countries, OECD countries, and so on. The fertility rate among the ultra-Orthodox women in Israel is 7, so 7 children per woman, and among the modern Orthodox, it's 4.3. By the way, among Israeli Arabs, it's even lower than it is than among modern Orthodox. And here you see the percentage of the ultra-Orthodox, the Haredim, among the overall population. Today, it's around 16%, something like that. 2050, it's the forecast is 26%, and in 2065, 32%, and that is of the overall population, not just the Jewish population, but the entire population of Israel. So, by 2065, which is not that far away, a whole third of the population of Israel will be ultra-Orthodox. There's not just ultra-Orthodox, not including modern Orthodox. So I thought that all these would be important kind of framing reasons to show the background for why this government came into being. One other thing that I wanted to do before we go to more of a conversation is to talk a little bit about the new government's attitude toward the occupation, which is what our organization is interested in. And so I'll just devote a little bit of attention to that. For us, there is a bit of a silver lining there. And the silver lining is that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is back in the headlines and in people's minds to some extent. After years of it being an issue that Israelis were not interested in, didn't pay much attention to, now we see that it's something that there's a little more interest in. But it's a very thin silver lining because the clouds are very dark and heavy. So what do I mean by that? When it comes to the government's approach toward the West Bank, there are issues that have to do with what would be the authority. Major changes there, and this is something that we could talk a little bit more about. Alan told me that this is a topic that he would like to elaborate, so we can talk more about it later. But what we've seen is already authority over the border police, which is the main tool that Israel uses, the main core that Israel uses in the West Bank to address demonstrations and so on, public order. The border police is going to be under Itamar Ben-Gvir's command, which is a major issue. It's a major change, and we'll see how he, manages it. But the potential is very dire, I think. And then we see that the authority over the civil administration. This is the Israeli agency that manages civil issues in the West Bank, both for Jews and Arabs, by the way, so including the settlers. That will be under Bezalel Smotrich's control within the Ministry of defense. It sounds like a bureaucratic issue. It's not. It's a very meaningful step. And again, if you'd like, I can elaborate about it later, why this is such a major issue. Third issue of authority that is important is that the authority over planning and development of settlements in the West Bank is going to be under a different ministry, Orit Struk's ministry. It's called the Ministry of National Tasks. So all three authorities here that are very important, the changes, in other words, the change that brings about a change in three realms of authority in the West Bank, all three of them are going to be under the authority of the most radical element in this incoming government, which is Otzma Yehudit and the Religious Zionism Party. Orit Struk, by the way, she was in my class in high school and actually went through a process of radicalization in high school. I remember that. So I know her since, I was 16 or something like that. So that's very important. Another aspect of what is going to happen under this incoming government in the West Bank is the issue of settlements. So again, as I said before, issues that have to do with settlements are going to be relegated to the most pro-settler ideological members of the government. The coalition agreement between Likud and the Smotrich and Ben Gvir's party would legalize the illegal outposts in the West Bank. That's a major issue. There are about 120 or so illegal outposts. So those are proto-settlements that were built without authority in violation of Israeli law. The coalition agreement also stipulates that there would be a 5-year plan to boost West Bank settlements, existing settlements, generous budgets for roads in the West Bank and so on. And another thing that's in the coalition agreement is the re-examination of land status in the West Bank, which would bring about the reclassification of land as government land to go to be classified as settlement, as land that can be given to settlements. That's what I was going to say. Another issue, which again we can talk about later if you'd like, is the matter of settlements. It's the matter of annexation. So it's really interesting that the government outlines do not talk about annexation, neither de jure nor de facto. There is, however, in the coalition agreement between Likud and Smotrich and Ben Gvir's party, there is talk about de jure annexation. The way it's worded is advancing policy toward applying sovereignty in Judea and Samaria. I'm going to admit this person. Yeah, there we go. But there's a whole plethora of issues in the coalition agreements that are de facto annexation. And I can talk about it. It's really interesting. There are various ways in which Israel can de facto annex the settlements and other components of the West Bank. So yeah, I'm not going to go into. I'm just looking at the clock here, and I want to leave enough time for our conversation. So this issue of de facto annexation, I think we're going to see on steroids. It already is. Yeah. Okay. So that's another issue that the government is going to address in the West Bank. The next thing is the government's attitude toward the Palestinian Authority. It is clear, and this is something that we're already seeing, the government is going to try to further weaken the Palestinian Authority. Major players in this government, particularly I'm talking about Smotrich, who has a whole kind of attitude or a whole an attitude toward this issue. A plan is to try to dismantle the Palestinian Authority, and I think that there are others who share his approach. So I made a mistake here. The idea is to deny any role for the authority in Area C, not Area A of the West Bank. Area C is the area where the settlements are. It's about 60% of the West Bank, and Israel has both security and administrative control there. Punishing the PA for any moves that it may make to resist the government of Israel. So that includes going to the international community, the UN, trying to bolster the Palestinian Authority's status in the international arena as a government of a state. And then just reducing the interface between Israeli agencies and Palestinian Authority agencies is another realm. This maybe I'll wait with that. I was asked to maybe later address the question which I'm always being asked. What can be done? What can we do? In other words, the U.S. government, the Jewish population, the Jewish activists, Jewish organizations, and so on. But we can come back to it later. What I'll do is I will now stop sharing, and then if we want to go to, I have quite a few interesting diagrams of polling data. If you want to go back to it, I can show you some of those slides later on.
So, Ori, do you want to open up now to questions or?
Sure. Yeah. If you want to start, Alan, and kind of have a little bit of a conversation, I'm happy to do that. And if there are people who want to ask either, on camera or in the chat, whatever is convenient. Yeah.
Okay. So since most of you have your screens dark, if you wanted to ask a question, if you could scroll over to the reactions and raise your hand, and I would call on you. I'll ask a question that somebody who wanted to attend but can't asked me to relay to you. There was an article not too long ago, last week, about the Friendship Circle. Is it Friendship Circle, or is it so it's the organization that deals with children of who had been killed in either side, and they have had an ongoing program in Israeli schools, and they were in about 75 different high schools, just presenting what their story was. And these are all people who are compassionate and forgiving, not militants or anything. And it seemed like the Department of Education was going to ban that or make it difficult for them.
Yeah. So there are two organizations that are involved in this. They're kind of sister organizations. They work together a lot. One is called the Family Circle, and the other is called Combatants for Peace. And there are other organizations as well that have been notified that they will not anymore have access to schools to do extracurricular activities in high schools in Israel because they are deemed unpatriotic, or I don't exactly know what the classification is. The problem is that the person who's now responsible for that, and that is, he actually has a title that is equivalent to a minister. He's a minister in the prime minister's office. And his name is Maoz, and he is the head of a party that is a very conservative party. It's one of the three parties that constitute the religious Zionism party. So in the religious Zionism party, you have Smotrich's party, which is what used to be many years ago the NRP, the National Religious Party. And then you have Ben Gvir's party, Otzma Yehudit, and then you have another party which is called Noam, and it's headed by Maoz, whose main authority or main portfolio is controlling and regulating extracurricular activity in schools. And so he is now reforming that field and is going to ban several organizations that had access to schools. Of course, this is the discretion, used to be the discretion of school principals, and he's now informed these organizations that they will not be let in anymore. I'll just say, note here that this person is, I don't want to use inflammatory adjectives, but is ultra conservative. His views include, very antagonistic attitudes toward the LGBT community, toward women. He's opposed to women's participation in the military. He has said things like, that women's place in the home, and so on and so forth. And he is a major component of that party that is the second largest party in Israel's government at the moment. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I don't see any hands, so let me get another one in here.
Sure.
The main thing that people seem concerned about in terms of Israeli democracy is that I don't know whether it's a proposition or whether it's proposed law to change the governance of, or the authority of, the Supreme Court. So I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts about that, and also do you think that really means that Israel isn't a true democracy, or it weakens? What would you say regarding that?
Right. So this is a bit of a long story. I'll try to simplify and not belabor it too much. The new Minister of Justice, Yariv Levin, has just proposed a reform plan to reform the main components of the judicial process in Israel. It includes a reform of the way in which judges are appointed, a reform in the makeup of the Supreme Court justices, a reform in the functioning of the Supreme Court, which is probably the most important thing. In other words, the bill that he's already introduced would stipulate that the Knesset would have the authority to strike down any decisions by the Supreme Court to outlaw legislation, Knesset legislation, on the basis of it being unconstitutional. This sound, I know that it sounds complicated, but the idea is that if the Supreme Court decides that a law that the Knesset passed is unconstitutional, the Knesset would have the authority by 61. The Knesset is 120 members, so with a 61 majority, to strike down any decision by the Supreme Court to ban such laws. That's a major issues. It's called the override clause, and that's been the main cause for the big demonstrations that you've seen in the past 2 weeks in Israel. There are other components to his reform, but those are the main issues. I'm not an expert on these issues, but what I'm hearing from legal experts, jurisprudence experts, both in Israel and in the United States, including people who are not the most, how would I put it, progressive, such as Alan Dershowitz, are saying that if that passes, if that reform passes, Israel will no longer be a liberal democracy. And it's a tragedy to me. I have to tell you, as an Israeli, you know, as an Israeli citizen who still very much believes in Israel, believes in the Zionist dream, in the Zionist ethos, and in the and endears the structure that has been built in Israel, to think that there would be a Knesset and a government that would intentionally weaken its democratic structure is very painful, very painful. Yeah.
Do you have any idea, or do they say what the likelihood of that being enacted?
The likelihood is high, with a caveat, and the caveat is that, and there's already talk about this, that there could be compromise, some kind of compromise agreements that would weaken the very far-reaching proposal or plan that the new Minister of Justice has proposed. So after he proposed it and there was rejection, he said that there's not going to be any negotiations over it. It's a done deal, or take it or leave it. And that he, of course, expects, rightly so, to have a majority in the Knesset for it. Now, there's already talk about the possibility of trying to work something out, maybe form a committee where there would be discussion over the depth and the breadth of this reform. There is, I have to say, many people in Israel, including progressives, do agree that there needs to be some changes in the legal system in Israel. But such far-reaching changes are really something that it seems that there is by the way, a recent poll that I just saw a couple of days ago showed that there is a slight majority. It's slight, but still a majority. I think it was like 51 or something like that of Israeli in the Israeli public, of those who said that they oppose the plan as it was proposed. So that's kind of the state of affairs at the moment on this.
Rabbi Steve?
Thanks. Actually, before I ask my question, I did see that Maxine Brand posted a question in the chat about 2 weeks ago it was predicted that if Aryeh Deri was forced to leave, the coalition would collapse. That has not happened. How stable is the coalition? So, yeah.
Right. So Deri was not. Deri was fired because the Supreme Court ordered his being fired. I won't go into all the details, but the idea is that Deri was convicted 3 times of crimes, pretty serious crimes. And the 3rd time, when he was convicted, he had a deal with the court where he said that he will leave politics in order to not go to prison, in order to not get a prison term. As we know, he did not leave politics. Therefore, the Supreme Court decided on the basis of reasonability that is completely, that it is unreasonable to the extreme that he would be appointed minister after he's promised that he will not go back to politics. He was, after he was fired, of course, you know, he protested it and so on, but he didn't say that he was going to leave the government as a result of that. So Shas is very much still in the coalition. It's not going to leave. Probably there will be other Shas Knesset members who will be appointed to the two portfolios that Deri originally held, which are Interior and Health. And Netanyahu is trying to work out some kind of a formula in which Deri will still be present at government meetings. So that's the state of affairs. It's at the moment. How stable is the coalition? It's a very good question, because coalitions in Israel typically are not that stable. It seems like this coalition is very stable, both because it has what is considered in Israel a pretty significant majority of 64, and much more so, and that's the main reason why it's so stable, is that it's very cohesive. In other words, the agreement on the bloc and between the components of the bloc are very solid agreements. They see eye to eye ideologically, and they stand behind Netanyahu solidly. And therefore, it doesn't seem like the types of issues that in the past have brought down governments, have brought down coalitions in Israel. It doesn't seem like it's going to be subject to such issues. I'm saying that, and of course, in Israeli politics, you never know, and things can come, you know, from left field and totally shake things up. But at the moment, it seems like a very stable and solid coalition. Yeah.
Thanks. That's great. Oh, look, Mike has his hand up. Okay.
You're mute, Mike. You'll have to unmute yourself. Yeah.
Oh,
No.
there we go.
Okay. That there were 4 elections which were very close. I don't know what the percentage of the vote was, but there was not enough for any coalition to emerge. Maybe the vote was 51-49, I'm not sure. And it would seem to me, why has it changed? What's happened that this group of parties seems to have a solid agreement? What happened to the, in the US, I think it would be more fragile, that coalition. And you had 4 elections that no party had the majority, in the past. So I don't quite understand. That's one thing I don't understand. I don't understand what's happened to the Labor Party over the years. We've all died off or something. I don't know. All gotten old.
Yeah, no. So okay, so there's actually a few questions here that are folded into one, and I'll try to address all points. I thought that I addressed a couple of them in my presentation, and maybe I'll just underscore them. What has happened was that the reason why since 1917 or so, when Netanyahu, when Netanyahu was indicted, what happened since Netanyahu was indicted was that there was the fault line between in Israel, in the political arena in Israel, changed, and there were those who were with Netanyahu and against Netanyahu. However, when you looked at the right and left power balance, the right, for years before that, had a majority. What happened, however, in those past 4 years or so, when we had 5 election campaigns, and there was this sense that, there was an instability in government, was that quite a few parties and leaders who are right-wing and who otherwise would have been allies of Netanyahu and would have joined his coalition have decided not to go with him on the principle that you don't join a coalition headed by someone who is facing 3 indictments of pretty serious crimes. And that is that is the reason, that is what has made Israel an unstable country in terms of, you know, the government and the coalition for the past 4 years or 5 years or so since Netanyahu was indicted. What happened in the past in these elections in November is several things. The sense, people's sense that there was instability in government motivated them to vote in larger numbers for Netanyahu and his natural allies, for the bloc. That's A. B, the power of his bloc, the voters of the secular right and the religious right, including the ultra-Orthodox, grew. The actual population of that demographic grew, and so they had more votes. That's another reason. And the most important reason, I think, is that they were much more motivated to go to the polls in larger proportions than people on the left and people who were in the anti-Netanyahu bloc, because they felt threatened by the outgoing government, because they felt threatened by Palestinian violence, and because of other reasons. They were just more motivated, and their turnout was higher. Those are the main reasons why you saw this change. You saw the kind of the tipping point. But overall, and that's something that I tried to sort of underscore in those slides that I showed you earlier, the Israeli electorate has become in past years more and more right-wing. Support for ideological left-wing parties, and we're talking about Labor, which you mentioned, and Meretz, has dwindled. Meretz did not pass the threshold in these past elections. Labor barely did, and that's the situation. That's the situation. Why is it that the left has lost power? We can talk about it if you want. I can continue and talk about that, but it's a pretty long and I feel, you know, kind of somber analysis. But yes, Labor and Meretz and maybe other left-wing parties, ideological left-wing parties, have dwindled in support, and Meretz has actually, I think that Meretz has collapsed because it didn't pass the threshold this time, and some kind of a different party will have to be formed, because I think that Meretz just doesn't have the popular support and the partisan oomph to continue fighting.
Steve, did you want to ask your question?
Yeah, it's also on this topic of left-wing identity. I just, in terms of, you mentioned, Ori, that being left-wing has become a derogatory term for people, and I guess I just wanted to ask, like, what are the components of a left-wing identity at this point? And I wonder what percentage of it has to do with how you think about the dynamics between Jews and Arabs, or Israeli Jews and Palestinians, and how much of it has to do with like general economic orientation, how much of it has to do with, you know, support for LGBTQ people, because it seems like that last issue, there's a fair amount of support in Israel still.
Right. It's very complicated, and what we see in past years, and this is something that Netanyahu has been masterful in his use of leftism, left-wingness, and so on, in his ability to turn this into an identity issue. He was really masterful at that. And so what has happened was that anti-leftism, being opposed to what is portrayed as leftism, has become a matter of identity. And so those who are in the Netanyahu camp, in other words, to a large extent, Mizrahim, Sephardi Jews, people in what is called the periphery, and the periphery here is both a geographic term, but it's also a socioeconomic term. People who are on the margins, who are not a part of the, kind of rich Tel Avivian high-techy elite. People who are not a part of the intellectual elites, people who are marginalized in all sorts of other ways, have made leftists, have kind of constructed the leftist identity, counter-identity, as the one that they oppose. And so their way of constructing their own identity was to how would I put it, to antagonize everything that they have equated with the old elites, or with the what they would call them, the elites in Israel. I call them the old elites. In other words, the Ashkenazi establishment, the intellectuals, the globalized high-tech elite, and so on and so forth. And being a part of those has become a target of the antagonism, bitterness, and a lot of other canned grievances of the people who consider themselves as being the periphery, peripheria. Periphery is a term that's used a lot in Israel to denote not only, as I said, geographic periphery, but also socioeconomic. And that sentiment has really been whipped up by Netanyahu, and to a large extent his allies, both in Likud, mainly in Likud, but also in other parties, and has brought about a situation where okay, so that was one component of this. The other component here is that lefties have been associated with peace. And I have to say, and I say it with a very heavy heart, the concept of peace and even the word peace in Israel has suffered a terrible, terrible crisis in the past, maybe I'd say 15 to 20 years. I remember very well a time when almost every party that ran in the elections used the word peace somehow in its campaign, in its slogans. Since the Second Intifada, and maybe, I say since the Second Intifada or so, that has ceased to be the case. There was a time, even I think that I remember it in the around 2005, 2006 or so, when Likud, how did it work? So Likud had a competition of stickers, of people coming out with bumper stickers that would lambast the concept of political peace. So if you say peace today in Israel, you are viewed as naive, as out of touch with reality, and so on and so forth. And for many people, being a leftist is supporting that kind of peace with the Arabs, with the Palestinians, which is viewed both as unattainable, pie in the sky, and so on, but also, more importantly, as undue, unjust, unwarranted concessions to the Palestinians. I know that all this sounds brutal. To me, it sounds brutal. As someone who's been supportive of a compromise with the Palestinians, but today this concept of reaching a political peace that is based on a compromise agreement with the Palestinians that would lead to a two-state solution has become something that many Israelis virulently oppose. I think that those are the main reasons why being a leftist has become so devalued. Now, one more thing that I would say here, which I think is really important, and that is the connection between Israeli politics and American politics. I mean, this happened at a time. It didn't start, but it reached its peak for sure during the Trump years, and the kind of attitudes that Israelis saw in the United States, which served as served to validate a lot of political sentiments in Israel, fueled this antipathy toward the left in Israel, and again, it was kind of a validation, if you will, for those sentiments. So it goes much deeper, but those are, I guess, the main points that are related to the devaluation of being a leftist. The one thing that is really important, which you touched upon, Rabbi Steve, is the attitude toward the LGBT community. I mean, while all this is happening, for most Israelis, including or particularly younger Israelis who identify themselves as overwhelmingly as right-wing, the LGBT issue has not entered the fray of the right-left divide. In other words, for many of them, most of them, including or folding in attitude that are antithetical to the LGBT community is verboten. It's just not right. They won't tolerate it, and in Israeli society in general, it's not being tolerated. So somehow, and it's kind of interesting because even because obviously there's an issue here that has to do with the Orthodox approach to homosexuality. Somehow this has not been I'm trying to pick my words carefully here, because there are some important exceptions to it, but overall that has not impacted attitudes toward the homosexual community in Israel and the LGBTQ community at large.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Do you want to go ahead, Mike?
Oh, yeah, sure. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Yeah, no, in the Arab world, there's such an hostility to LGBT community. I don't know how that plays into the feeling on the part of the right in Israel. I doubt it. I mean, maybe there's just more of an acceptance in Israel, period.
It's a really interesting point that you're bringing up. I mean, when the anti-Netanyahu camp in Israeli politics was trying to invite and include Arab parties. And there was a discussion among the progressive Israeli parties, Israeli Jewish parties, with the Arab parties on trying to institutionalize the relationship and to come up with some kind of a political bloc. One of the main stumbling blocks was the issue of LGBT rights and attitude toward homosexuality. It is such a taboo in Israeli Arab society, and we're not even talking about Israel's neighbors, but the Middle East at large. But we're talking about Israeli Arabs that they just couldn't agree on it. There were attempts, for example, to try to rally Arab Knesset members to support legislation that has to do with LGBT rights, and they couldn't do it. They couldn't get their act together. They wouldn't participate in LGBTQ demonstrations and so on and so forth. So there was one particular matter of legislation that had to do with, if I remember correctly, it was a matter of adoption or something like that. I'm blanking on it, but something like adoption for LGBTQ couples. And they just, and we're talking about parties that are Arab parties that are pretty progressive on other issues and other fronts, but on this issue, it's a major taboo in Arab society. So yeah, you're right.
Julia, did you have a question?
Hi, yeah, I'm not sure. I'm struggling with if it's partly a Rabbi Steve question, partly not a Rabbi Steve question, but I'm thinking about all of this and how it meshes with like my Zionist views and being a self-proclaimed leftist. It's really, really hard for me to grapple with my belief in Zionism and what is going on right now. And so one, how to even think about that, which very much goes along with my life as an American, living in a place with a lot of rules that or a lot of things going on that I don't believe in. So that's part of this every day anyway. But part of it is how I grapple with being a Zionist, but also not being super stoked about what's going on, and how I deal with that on my own, but how I also deal with that when I hear stories on the radio saying how awful Israel is, when I talk to my non-Jewish friends, and how do I approach or other Jewish friends, how do you approach the topic that I believe in this, but not this way? And then also, do you think this is permanent? I know, light stuff.
I have to tell you, I think about it all the time. These kinds of thoughts that you just described, and the kind of sentiments that I go around thinking about it all the time. And I hear from people, I'm kind of immersed in a community of people who think about it all the time and who express such emotions and such positions. Some people saying it's over. There's no point in investing effort and so on in Israel anymore, because it's not something that we can identify with anymore and so on. I don't share it. I really do think that for people who care about Israel, there's a lot. First of all, the stakes are very high, and there's a lot to fight for. And in other words, there's a great reason and a great justification to continue and to step up the efforts and the fight for the kind of Israel that we believe in and that we want to see materialize. the one thing that we have to acknowledge is that there are two, well, more than two, but very broadly speaking, two visions and two attitudes and two camps in Israel that are at a kind of a cultural war with each other. And at the moment, the supporters of one of them are in power. Now, what I showed you earlier, the kind of slides that I showed you, do suggest that that camp is better poised to dominate the Israeli public sphere in the future. They multiply in much higher rates. So yes, that is true, but I don't think that it means that there's no chance for the other camp to strengthen and maybe even I wouldn't say dominate, but influence the Israeli public sphere in a direction and in ways that you and I would identify with more. Israel's changing. It's changing its face. Some of it is, I think, for me, I would say, regrettably, irreversible. But a lot of it is not only that it's reversible, but it's changing in many kinds of ways. So we mentioned the conundrum of the LGBT rights and so on. So while Israel is becoming more conservative in some ways, it is also becoming more progressive in other ways. Take Jerusalem. I grew up in Jerusalem, and I remember the way it was in Jerusalem in the 80s and 70s. On the one hand, yes, neighborhoods that in the past were, almost 100% secular are now becoming almost 100% Orthodox or ultra-Orthodox. Yes, that is true. But on the other hand, nightlife in Jerusalem on Friday nights is much more vital and how would I put it, than it was in the past. So it's simultaneously both becoming in some ways more conservative, and in other ways, becoming more progressive. And I think that the name of the game now, as I see it, for people who hold my worldview, is to just try to influence, to strengthen, to bolster the direction that we believe in. That's one thing, so that our vision for Israel is more powerful and has more influence, but also to try to put some red lines that would block the verve, there's a word for it that I'm blanking on now, but the kind of verve that the right is marching on with, and sometime in the future, hopefully, work out a mechanism, some kind of a mechanism for coming up with a compromise vision for the state of Israel, where rules of the game that would accommodate everyone will be worked out, including, and this is something that I believe in, rules of the game, if you wish to call it that, for accommodation of Israeli-Palestinian relations. It's something that we didn't quite, it's kind of funny for me as an APN person to not make that the main issue for the discussion, but I very clearly realize why we didn't. It will have to go hand in hand. In other words, the conversation about about working out a compromise inside Israel between the various camps inside Israel, and in other words, working out new rules for Israeli democracy, and working out new rules for Israelis and Palestinians to learn to live together, to work out some kind of a compromise between them. I think we will see that those two issues are connected, and that they will have to go hand in hand in the future. Yeah, I don't know if I answered the question, or if it's in any way comforting. I don't. It probably isn't, but that's the way I see it. Yeah.
All right, as I'd like to round this out by bringing us back to, okay, so what are we doing here? So it's a two-parter. What are we doing? What is it going on in Washington that can influence this process? And secondly, I know APN is either the primary or very instrumental in putting forth protests this past weekend and next weekend in a number of major cities in North America. The question would be, what's going on in Washington? And second of all, what's the focus? What is they're protesting. What do they protest? It's hard to, it's not like abortion where you can say what you're protesting for or against.
Right. So maybe I'll start from the last point of what the protest is about. What the protest is about, both in Israel and by some people here. By the way, there's also there's protest across the United States in various towns by Israeli expatriates who live in the United States. There were protests over this weekend in Washington, New York, if I understand correctly, Seattle, LA, so quite a few places. But what that protest is about is mainly the issue of democracy. People rising up to say, enough, there's a limit. You can't destroy Israeli democracy. And I've heard people, making really compelling cases and speeches about the kind of sacrifices that Israelis have made over the years to protect Israeli democracy. When people go out to fight, to wars and so on, it's not only about the existential protecting of Israelis from neighbors, from violent neighbors, from enemies, but also protecting the character of the country as a democracy and a Jewish state. So that's the main issue. The main issue is democracy. Most of the people who go out to demonstrate do not go. These are not peace demonstrations. They're not anti-war demonstrations. They are anti the attempt to destroy democracy. And if you want to put it differently, you could the flip side of it, pro-democracy, pro-equality, all the values that comprise the founding values of the State of Israel and the kind of Zionism that I think most of us here support and want to see play out. So that's the nature of the protest. And you see, by the way, that if you look at the crowds in Israel, you see that there are many Israel flags there. These are very patriotic protests in Israel. Regarding what can be done and so on, I think we've had a lot of, as you can imagine, as an advocacy organization, Advocacy in Education, that is stationed in Washington. We've had a lot of conversations about what can be done. By the way, APN is a member of a sort of an umbrella group that is called the Progressive Israel Network, which the Reconstructionist movement is a part of. we've had conversations about what can be done, and there are kind of various schools. And I think that this sort of overarching message is that we have to be realistic. The Biden administration has come in with a clear decision that it is not going to get deeply involved in the Israel-Palestine issue. I don't think that even what has happened in Israel, and even, having someone like Itamar Ben-Gvir as a very powerful minister in the government, is going to sway this administration from its strategic decision, to not become a broker of peace deal between Israelis and Palestinians. That is not going to happen. What could happen, and what we very much hope will happen, and we do see signs encouraging to us, signs that will happen, is that this administration will, in a friendly way, which should be the way to do it, draw some red lines for this Israeli government, and will say, there are things that we will not accept, both because we still uphold the two-state solution as a way to resolve the conflict. So we will not let you, for example, take measures that will block the way, hermetically block the way for a future two-state solution. So no to annexation, for example, no to a wholesale legalization of illegal outposts in the West Bank, no to a completely uncontrolled settlement drive, and so on. So red lines of this kind. That is definitely something that can be expected, and that I think that we and organizations like ours can play a very active role in working with the administration to do it in a constructive, friendly, yet effective manner. Rallying partners, U.S. allies in the international community to work with on these issues, strengthening the Palestinian Authority, helping to build state institutions in the West Bank. There's a whole host of things that this administration can do without too much bureaucracy, without needing congressional legislation, just by administrative power, to address this crisis, and it is a crisis, and to help maintain both democracy in Israel and the vision of a two-state solution. But I think that we cannot and should not expect it to do much more than that. So a drive toward Israeli-Palestinian peace under the current circumstances, trying to broker peace, not going to happen, and we shouldn't try to push toward that for now. And more aggressive measures, such as cutting aid or even conditioning aid, that's the way I see it. It's not the policy of APN. We have now come in favor of conditioning aid, but we have done that, at least as I see it, with the clear understanding and notion that this is not something that the administration is going to pursue. It's not a leverage that they embrace. So those are the kinds of things that we can expect of the administration. I think there's a whole host of things that the Jewish community, that people who support Israel, who care about Israel, can do, that are not just aimed at the administration and aimed at high-level U.S. policy, but things that Americans who care about Israel can do in order to send a message and to show Israelis that people outside of Israel who care about Israel are invested in Israel's future, in Israel's character, that they really, really care about it, that it matters to them, that when it comes, not only when it comes to issues of religious pluralism, but also when it comes to Israel's character. That you know, American Jews who care about Israel want to see it as a democracy, as a just country, as a moral country, as a country that is not provoking violence and so on and so forth, as a responsible government. So all these things, I think, are in various kinds of ways can be projected, addressed to the Israeli public, and it can be done and I think it's important to note here that Israelis are very acute to messages coming from across the Atlantic, from the United States. They care. Even if you think, and you think correctly, that Israelis don't care that much about American Jewry as an establishment, they do care about America, about public opinion in the United States in general, and about American Jews as a component in Jewish identity and so on and so forth. So I definitely think that there's a lot that can be done by the Jewish community here in the United States and other non-Jews who care about Israel as well, to send a message that that people care about the character of Israel.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, we kind of like bringing it home right on time then. So thank you so much for this. This has been very illuminating. I really appreciated it. And it's shown a light on a lot of corners that were very murky. And so I want you to know that that was accomplished.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you for inviting me. And I would say something that I always say, you know, particularly when I give talks to students, but not only that, my talks always come with a lifetime guarantee. Meaning by that if any of you have a question or a comment or anything as you go along of issues that either have to do with what my organization focuses on or anything else that's related to Israel and Israeli-Palestinian affairs, do write to me. You can get my email address from Alan, and I would welcome and promise to reply to any email that would come.
Wonderful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, and thank everybody for coming. And have a good have a good new week.
Thank you. Thanks, Ori. Thanks, Alan.
Thank
All right.
you. Okay,
See you
bye
soon.
now.
Bye-bye.